that the Senate is not a democratic institution. That is the sickening core of what we feel deep down when we watch the Senate work. The Senate destroys the American illusion of democracy as it was designed to do. We are allowed to ignore that uncomfortable truth most of the time, but not now. The founders deliberately created an anti-democratic institution and called it the United States Senate.
Okay, let's go.
That was not the founders' only anti-democratic design. The founders did not believe in democracy. They experimented with it. They did not allow most people to be voters. Democracy allow voting among men.
Nice one, sir.
That group of white Republican men you saw sitting in the Senate Judiciary Committee was the founding fathers' idea of what democracy was supposed to look like. That's what senators were supposed to look like, and that's what voters were supposed to look like. Most adults would not be allowed to vote in the founders' design. Most of them. No women were ever supposed to be allowed to vote according to the founding fathers. That's why there were no founding mothers. No black people were ever supposed to be allowed to vote. Because slaves were never supposed to be allowed to vote. No poor people. Different states instituted different rules about how much land you had to own, how much wealth you had to have, or how much you literally had to pay in a poll tax so that you could cast a ballot. But even that favored white male minority that was allowed to vote was not allowed to vote for president. And they were not allowed to vote for United States senators. They were only allowed to vote for electors who would then meet in an electoral college, and those electors would then decide who the president would be, and those electors were free to vote for anyone they wanted to be president. The Founding Fathers didn't think mere citizens would ever be wise enough to vote for a United States senator. So that was left to the state legislatures to decide who the United States senators would be. The Founding Fathers did not believe in democracy. They never believed in one man, one vote, and they certainly never believed in one person, one vote. And so when it came time to design the United States Senate, since they would have to leave this in one vote, each state would get 2 senators. The big states would get 2, and the tiny states would get 2. And I can understand how that seemed kind of fair at the time. But they never dreamed that there would one day be a state called California with a population almost the size of England, and that Delaware would become even smaller in relative size to what it was then compared to the big states when it was a founding member of the United States of America. The population gap between the big states and the small states is bigger than ever and keeps getting bigger all the time. So the votes of New Yorkers and Californians become worth less every day in the United States Senate compared to the votes of people in the Dakotas and Wyoming and most of the Confederate states. And so the Senate is now deeply undemocratic and getting worse every single day. People who live in countries that have never really pretended to be fully democratic don't feel the disappointment and sickness that Americans feel when democracy so obviously fails.
2 enemies left.
People in those countries are realists about the limits of their so-called democracies. An American realist knows that the federal government has never even tried democracy, not for one day. And so today, in the United States Senate, the senators who represent 55% of the American people lost an important Senate vote. Again. I loved the Senate when I worked there, just loved it. Everyone did. And everyone was proud to work there. Like everyone else in the Senate, I looked down on the unruly and unsophisticated House of Representatives with its gerrymandered districts. But after my first few years working in the Senate, it was slowly dawning on me that the Senate was an unfixable crime against democracy. And that is truly sickening. That is at the base of what people are feeling today. You live in a country where the founders believed you would never be smart enough to vote directly for a United States senator. And they were wrong about that. They were wrong about a lot. But it does mean that you have to work much harder in this country if you really do believe in democracy. If you want to elect a United States Senate with a majority that actually represents a majority of the people, then you and everyone you know who feels that way has to work much harder than the Founding Fathers ever believed that you could or you would. And that means that every election matters, whether it's a midterm election or a presidential election year. And it means, most importantly, in every state, that every vote matters. The vote for United States Senate that the Founding Fathers never wanted you to have.
How do you think history will judge the U.S. Senate? Poorly.
Entrance.
I think that remains to be seen, and we'll know a lot more in November, but I don't think that the millions of women who have been protesting and calling their senators' offices are going to be particularly happy if we see a confirmation vote.
Joining our discussion now, Jennifer Palmieri, a former White House Communications Director for President Obama and a former Communications Director for Hillary Clinton's campaign. And Lisa Graves is back with us. And Jennifer, I want to give you an open floor to simply react to what you saw today.
You know, I mean, it's very distressing because on the one hand, we see that someone who's proven himself unworthy to be on the United States Supreme Court in many ways is likely to get confirmed tomorrow. But I think what we've seen, watching, happening in the country today is history. The segment that you just did sort of set up this question that we're wrestling with, which is we're having to come to terms with the fact that power has been held in this country by men, by white men, and while we had a great idea about the country being created of all people being equal, we enfranchised a small number of people and disenfranchised a much larger number. Because that only applied if you were white, a man, and owned land. And that bill is due. And as distressing as it is to know that Brett Kavanaugh is likely to be on the court, I look at the progress that we've made in just the last 30 years. You look at the Anita Hill hearing and what she underwent. And despite that, and despite seeing how the President of the United States, treats women who have accused him of sexual assault, Christine Blasey Ford had the courage to come forward and say, this man assaulted me. I'm sure of it. I am sure it was this man. Here are some things I don't remember about it, but I am sure of that. I am sure I was assaulted by him, and it was he who did it, and I'm willing to say it in front of the United States Senate and all the world. And in turn, you have seen an outpouring of thousands and thousands of women come forward to say the same. And you see these women in the Capitol who confront senators with rage and fear, and I am happy to say with pride about talking about their assault and expecting that they are going to be heard, believed, and respected. And no matter what the outcome is tomorrow, that's not going to change. A year ago today, the New York Times wrote the first story about Harvey Weinstein and really ignited Me Too. Harvey Weinstein, Matt Lauer, Charlie Rose, Mark Halperin, Al Franken, you know, the list goes on. And the United States Senate, that may be one place where people in that chamber on the Republican side, and I'm sorry to say one Democrat, don't get it, but the voters do. And that's what I think you'll see the reaction coming in November.
Let's take a look at the polling that Jennifer just mentioned, between the difference between the Clarence Thomas situation and the Brett Kavanaugh situation. I think we have it up on the screen, but more people actually believed Clarence Thomas over Anita Hill. Anita Hill was only believed by 24%. Clarence Thomas was believed by 40%, 27 years ago. Now, Christine Blasey Ford is believed by 45%. She is, of all the four people we're talking about here, the person who has been believed the most in real time when it was happening, 45%. Brett Kavanaugh, fewer people believe Brett Kavanaugh than believed Clarence Thomas, down to 33%. And so, Lisa, that is a kind of grim polling picture of a very slow progress.
Well, I think what you pointed out before is that we have a counter-democratic institution of the Senate that now is installing someone who is disliked by most American people to an institution, the Supreme Court, that is not subject to real democratic check by the people. And in the face of what we've seen, even with the fears I think many people had after the election in 2016 of Donald Trump and the potential vacancy of the Supreme Court, I don't think anyone thought that he would somehow find a man so close to his image in terms of the lying, in terms of being accused so credibly of sexual assault, in terms of the partisanship and putting forth conspiracy theories. Here we stand. And I think the American women in this country and men are not going to stand for that. I think we're seeing a surge. And I think that in 2018 and 2020, women and men are going to unite to repel and repudiate what's happening today, this weekend in Washington, and what's happening to deny our democracy, the full measure of our democracy through many of these senators in the United States Senate and the injustice that they're doing right now.
As the accident of timing would have it, Sonia Sotomayor and Elena Kagan both appeared at Princeton at a panel discussion there. They're both graduates from Princeton. They did that today. I want to listen to Justice Sotomayor talking about the institutional reputation now for the Supreme Court and how the court holds on to legitimacy in this atmosphere and what a challenge that is. Let's listen to that.
I think we have a chance of holding on to our legitimacy. As Elena says, though, we're each going to have to think about how to do that and how to implement and support our institutional reputation.
And Jennifer, that institutional reputation seems like more of a challenge than ever.
I mean, and it's so sobering to hear her say we have a chance of holding on to the integrity of the institution. Yeah. Just a chance. And the one thing that I have not been able to move beyond is understanding that when Brett Kavanaugh walked into the hearing room last week, he thought he was done. He spoke of his nomination in the past tense. He talked about when I still believed there's a chance I would be confirmed. So, you know, one piece he left out of his op-ed that he gave to the Journal was, you know, the truth, which was the airing I gave in the Judiciary Committee was when I thought I was going to lose. Even he thought that the Republicans would not confirm him after what they heard. But despite what they heard from Christine Blasey Ford, and despite the very partisan and what I found truly shocking testimony that he gave on last week, the Republicans continued on and gave them their approval. And, you know, and now you're in a situation where you have a United States Supreme Court justice instead of Sonia Sotomayor saying we have a chance of holding on to that integrity in the court.
Jennifer Palmieri, Lisa Graves, thank you both for joining our discussion tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Sean.
And when we come back, the women who helped Senator Lisa Murkowski make up her mind, 2 women from Alaska who traveled all the way to Washington to be heard, will join us. Here's more of what Senator Lisa Murkowski said tonight when she explained why she is opposed to Brett Kavanaugh's nomination.
There is an emotion that really has been unleashed in these recent weeks.
I see the bomber.
And these are discussions that we need to have as a country. We need to have these as a country. We need to bring survivors to a place where they feel that they can heal. But until you come out of the shadow and know and do so without shame, it's pretty hard to heal.
Senator Murkowski's office was flooded with women trying to talk to her, including at least 130 women who traveled from Alaska in the hope of being heard by their senator. And here is some of what Lisa Murkowski heard from them.
I have met with so many survivors, and I know that every single one of us has. We've heard those voices. We've heard those voices, and I hope that we have all learned something, that we owe it to the victims of sexual assault to do more and to do better and to do it now with them.
Two women who traveled the 4,000 miles from Alaska to Washington, D.C. to speak to Lisa Murkowski and help change her mind about Brett Kavanaugh will join us next. If you live in Virginia or Maryland and you want to make your voices heard in the United States Senate, you can take an Uber to get there. If you live in Alaska, it's a lot harder. Alaska is farther away from Washington than Paris is. But that didn't stop some women from Alaska from making the trip in the hope of being heard by their Senator, Lisa Murkowski. Two of those women are joining us now, Manu Minai and Carrie Willoughby. Carrie, tell me when you decided to go to Washington and how long did you plan to be there? This is the kind of trip where you can't quite be sure how long you're going to be needed there.
Hi, Lawrence. Thank you for having me. I just decided on Tuesday night when I heard that there were over 100 women coming to D.C. with the ACLU, and I jumped at the opportunity to be able to talk to Senator Murkowski, even if there was a glimmer of hope that we could influence her decision on the vote.
And Manu, what has it been like for you in the Senate? Is this your first time visiting the United States Senate and trying to have an influence there?
Thank you so much, Lawrence, for inviting us first. And actually, this is my first time in the Senate and trying to go through this procedure.
That meant to serve as a Supreme Court justice, and I asked Senator Murkowski to please be brave and devote her conscience, and not just for the women in the room that day or the women in Alaska, but for all the women in the whole United States. I asked her to please vote no.
And Manu, what did you tell Senator Murkowski when you got your chance?
Lawrence, I came to Washington, D.C. as a teacher, as a mother, as a grandmother, and to please Senator Murkowski. And I have to thank her immensely for being so kind to accept our visit, and so to invite us to her office and to listen to each one of us individually and take her time to listen to such stories that they were heart-wrenching. And as a teacher, I have to say a vote to confirm Judge Kavanaugh. It tells our survivors of physical and sexual abuse victims that they have absolutely no right.
Well, good evening once again from our NBC News headquarters here in New York. Day 624 of the Trump administration. And just like that, as they say, it's all over but the shouting. And Brett Kavanaugh appears poised to be the next justice of the Supreme Court. On this front, we have some breaking news from the New York Times tonight. And we're standing by to talk to one of the reporters breaking the story in just a moment. About today, we may now have a new benchmark for the division in our country. In one of the more dramatic days ever witnessed in Washington, the nation